everyone. Welcome back to the Neighborhood Conversations, where we chat about inclusive conversations, just to welcome different topics, variety of topics that help community grow. It's such a pleasure to be in your car, in your neighborhood, whenever you're going to listen to this podcast. It's a pleasure to be back with you. This is your host, Templeton Sawyer, and today we're going to be talking about racism, especially in the workplace, especially when you're trying to acknowledge it and trying to be aware of racism. And so we have the amazing DeRico Symonds. I know he does a lot in community. He's a very activist type of guy and someone who is just well respected. And I definitely respect him in his leadership role. And I'll say, welcome to the Neighborhood Conversations, DeRico. How are you, man? How are you?
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very happy to be here. And just a really quick common mistake. Symonds, not Symonds.
Simons. Okay. See. That's how we do it.
Not a problem, man. Not a problem. All good.
I told you that before.
Yeah.
I said Simmons before to you. I think it was when I was interviewing you on Instagram.
Yep.
I asked you before, and then, hey, that's how we do
Listen,
it. That's how we do it.
Yeah, it's common mistake. All good. No problem.
Yeah. So, DeRico, we are here in the Neighborhood Conversations talking about racism today. And this is a hot topic that it goes in continuously. It depends on the comfort level of the conversation. And so I want to start with this question, like, as an individual, how are you doing when it comes down to educating people in racism in the workplace or just in general?
Yeah. So, I do a lot of different workshops, a lot of different conversations for workplaces pertaining to racism, pertaining to white privilege, and history of the African Nova Scotian community. And so that's mainly sort of how I'm at least trying to steward the conversation, move it forward, and bring about awareness. And the work itself isn't easy, but the emotional labor, the other side of it, because it's personal to me as well. So not only am I experiencing it, I'm also teaching it.
Yeah, and I know that you have a unique role. So let the audience know what you do currently, career-wise. That I know you were at NASCAT as a director of belonging, but now you're somewhere with the government. So
That's right.
let others know. I'm coughing, man. Yeah.
Grab some water.
Yeah.
It's a neighborhood conversation, man. So formal employment, I work for the province of Nova Scotia in the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism Initiatives. And I will say, I'm not here representing government. So for folks who are listening, don't take this as the province said. This is simply DeRico.
Yeah.
But I do work for the province in the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism, or OEA. My background is in youth and community. I've worked with Phoenix Youth Programs for a number of years. I've worked with the municipal government of Halifax for a number of years. And then as well, I founded two nonprofits in Halifax, Game Changers 902, and as well as ACE, founding member. There was a few of us. I do a lot of different things, a lot of contractual work. I'm doing some work with the city of Edmonton right now. I've done some contractual work with the city of Halifax, all pertaining to really well-being of communities and Black communities, to be specific. Formal employment with the government, but really my heart is in community, whether that's volunteer or whether that's paid contract work. I'm working to try to, make sure that our community is as best as it can be.
That's really good, man, and kudos to you, to all the work that you're doing, and all the advocacies projects that you're working on, and that's really amazing. DeRico, when it comes down to like racism in the workplace, and you talk about community and how it connects, but I want to ask this question about, sometimes it's hard for employers to bring such topic into the workplace, or try to just engage it into its policies. How would you encourage employers to talk about racism in the workplace, how to address it? Because sometimes it's a hard topic to have, or to add into its policies and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the answer to this can be very nuanced and long, but I'll try and shorten it because there's a lot of it depends for me.
Yeah.
Because there are some folks, some white folks, who simply try to address it, but also may also do further harm,
Yeah.
and even vice versa. And there are black folks who are suffering in the workplace at the hands of it not being addressed or not being listened to. And so I think that there's many ways to go about addressing it. First thing I would say right off of the jump is that I really believe that if we're going to be in a place with zero tolerance for racism and discrimination, some people have to be made an example and some people need to be fired.
Mm.
And there are a lot of people that are hesitant to do that. But if you're truly working to have an anti-racist organization, institution, or government, that has to happen. You need the leader, the leadership needs to set the tone in the organization. So if one of your employees is being harmed, being traumatized, experiencing racism, and you know about it, and you consciously choose to do nothing, you failed them, you failed the community, you failed your organization. So that's number one for me. You need to set the tone and examples. I think that it's also important to dig deep into your policies, into your operational structure, because there's a thing that I say is that you can mandate policy, but you can't mandate ideology. Sometimes people won't get down with the policies that you're trying to implement. So as I said, those folks need to be weeded out because they can't be a part of the new way that we're looking to move forward. And then after that, after sometimes people getting fired, after looking at your policies, well, who can we bring in to also provide secondary or even tertiary information to educate our staff? I think that leadership has to go through sometimes an overhaul, but really a full review of policies, full training. And I don't just simply mean one-off cultural proficiency conversations, full, meaning for the full year, maybe the next two. But the whole organization and leadership needs to sort of get down with how we think about moving forward, and then continuous. The idea is that this is something that is nonstop because racism is nonstop. Racialized Black folks have to deal with this for the rest of their lives. And if you're going to be an anti-racist organization, you have to do that for the rest of your existence.
Wow, I 100% agree with you. And the part I like where you say setting the tune, being the tune setter, in leadership is really important. And if you set the tune the wrong way, then that's how it's going to be set. And people are just going
That's
to
right.
view you in that way, and that's how they're going to view you as a racist person because that's how you set the tune, and you didn't correct the behavior. You were not supportive. But of course, yeah, there is room for forgiveness, but knowing that you did that, it's still going to be in some person's head, and so knowing how to be that tune setter is very important, very very important. And we know I asked this question: does racism still exist in today's world? I asked that question because for some people they don't experience it,
Yep.
they don't see it happening. But does it
Yep.
still happen in today's working world, especially in Nova Scotia? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So absolutely big yes. And for folks who do not know, people reference Nova Scotia as Mississippi of the North, and racism is so pervasive sometimes that if you're not a person of color, if you're not Black, you may not see it. And it absolutely exists and permeates in every single workplace, in every single institution. There's nobody who is exempt. And many of these organizations are white dominant or of European descent dominant, and Black folks or racialized folks are the minority. And the thing is that there's no excuse, in this day and age. We're so technologically and socially connected that there is no excuse to not know. And then once you do know, I believe, especially if you're in a leadership role, you have a moral and ethical and workplace responsibility to do something about it. We can't simply do nothing. And so it absolutely exists. And for those who believe that it does not, listen to your Black or your racialized colleagues or your employees. They've probably already told you, and you've probably chose to do nothing about it.
Yeah. you gotta be educated, and I feel like continuous education is really important. What are some resources that you can share with people that they can look up, that you're aware of, that people can actually get connected to learn more about how to be educated around this topic?
Well, see, I'm going to answer this question with a little bit of humor. And so, because I've been asked this question before, my answer is really, I say, so, okay, so if you're looking to order a pizza or some takeout food and you don't really know where you're going to get it from, what do you do? Oh, well, I go on the internet and I Google.
Mhm.
Okay, great. And a lot pops up, right? Yeah, yeah, it does. And then you eventually
Yeah.
choose one. And so, the first place that I would actually start is to do that. If you're unsure about resources, if you're unsure of what racism is, it takes 30 seconds to look something up on the internet. However, I'll start with maybe some places that would be worthwhile visiting. I think Pier 21 Museum has some amazing exhibits around anti-racism. I think that Birchtown Museum, I think the Black Cultural Center of Nova Scotia, I think to look at resources through the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. They have amazing things on their website. I would also encourage folks to look at the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism Initiatives website, oeaengagement.ca. And then as well, African Nova Scotian Affairs Office for the provincial government. And then as well, the ANZIO, or African Nova Scotian Affairs Integration Office with the municipal government. There's a lot of resources that are local and hyper local right here in our city. But again, with some humor, but also seriousness, is that like a Google search will do you wonders in terms of finding
Oh
some
yeah,
resources.
totally. My mom always told me like, "Hey, if you don't know nothing, Google it. Go on YouTube, educate yourself in those ways. Because once you just search up the word or just the topic, there's lots of information for sure. Yeah,
There's just
yeah.
no excuse. There's no
No,
excuse
no,
anymore. Like
no
we're,
excuse.
we're just
No
so
excuse.
connected.
No excuse. So my next question focus on just looking at racism as it is as an issue. Do you think that racism is a individual or systematic issue?
I look forward to my family's security in the future. That's the main goal as a father.
The empowerment from changing careers has really just made me want to get out of bed in the morning.
I'm looking forward to growing my business. So I want to hire people like I was hired. I want to give guys that chance.
Il me fera plaisir de continuer à travailler avec les immigrants francophones en Nouvelle-Écosse.
I am looking forward to the financial freedom that I never had before.
Yeah, so I think that it's actually both because so it's both because it's the individuals that make up the system or the systemic
Mm.
problem. And so there are when we talk about systemic racism, we got to think about, well, who is the system? Who the system is
Yeah.
the people, which is the individuals that are upholding that systemic issue. And so those individuals, if they are racist, if they're not educated on the topic, they're not seeing sort of that overarching systemic racism or systemic issue that's happening. And so I would answer that saying that it's both, because we can't say that it's systemic in nature without talking about the individuals that actually make up that system itself.
Right, right. That is so true when it comes down to making the system and seeing it as it is. But I connect to another question about how do we be allies in this area? And I know sometimes allyship comes in so many different ways. When someone um how do we fight against this? And I know that there's so much movements going around to talk about this and to come together to educate ourselves, but more so supporting an individual who has received that of those comments, and how can we work against that and without being aggressive in that
Yeah,
concept
of
in that
course.
context as well. Yeah.
Of course. So, I would say right away that allies are extremely important and can be one of the best assets in actually helping dismantle the system. especially white allies, because if we understand and know the history, we know that folks of European descent have largely, if not mostly, benefited from racism and systemic racism. And so first thing I'll say is that allyship is not a finite destination. It's not something that a place where you can simply arrive. And I'll say that I am going to be Black for the rest of my life. I am going to be engaged, whether I like it or not. I'm going to be experience racism, whether I like it or not. And so with that note is that for allies, you can't simply dip your toe in, get uncomfortable, and leave. Because the reality is that you could never talk about racism again if you didn't want to. And that's a reality you could do. Black folks, we can't do that. And so when I'm talking about allyship, I'm really talking about folks who are willing to strap their boots up and walk that road with me for the rest of my life, because I have to do that. And so what that means is that, you may have to hold your friends, your family accountable. You may have to believe me or believe us when we tell you that this is happening. And you may have to show up, you may have to speak out. But you also need to educate yourself. But for me, that thinking about allyship is that it is a continuous thing. It's not simply watching some YouTube, watching some documentaries, and attending cultural competency training, and then you simply arrive. You'll never be culturally competent in someone else's culture, but the goal is to truly and aggressively try to understand and learn as much as you can, and walk that road alongside your racialized or Black folks, beside them. Sometimes you may actually have to go in front and take on a fight that they've been fighting forever. Because again, if folks are understanding and appreciating the notion of white privilege, you can jump out ahead and you can say certain things, or you can infiltrate the system. And so I'm looking for co-conspirators. I'm looking for people who are at the same time walking with me, trying to take this down, to make it as fair and as equitable as possible for everyone. And allies are extremely important in this situation. Last thing I'll say on this is that, simply put, if it was up to Black folks to solve racism, bro, this would be solid. We would have done it by now. We would have done it by now. We need support. Allyship is very important for that reason.
And I always I do you think, and I mix this question respectfully. Do you think racism only happened to Black people? That's a big question. I put that question out because, sometimes when we think, I feel like that's been the norm, and the norm is okay. And I know the movement is being towards Black people, towards Asian people, towards Indigenous people. Do you think that racism only happens culturally, or does it happen in a different context as well?
Yeah. So the reason why I think that people really equate racism to Black people, for one, is because white is synonymous with Black. Black wouldn't exist if there wasn't white, and white wouldn't exist if there wasn't Black. White people actually, racism, first of all, is socially constructed. And so these actual terms of white and Black, et cetera, have been socially constructed by white folks. And I'll throw out a few things. People should research papal bulls. They should research long ago in terms of what those did and to Indigenous and Black communities. And so, it's synonymous. And so, of course, racism exists outside of just Black folks, but it exists differently with Black people because there hasn't been many, if not any, other culture or race of people, if you will, on this planet who have been subjected to what Black people have been subjected to over that amount of time. Now, there may be some historians who are listening who might say, what about, and that's why I said, there may not be many, if not any. And so that's why when people think about racism, it's synonymous with white, and for the long sort of standing history of enslavement and treatment and laws that sort of still exist today. That's why people just sort of think about racism and Black folks. But absolutely, racialized folks Asian, Muslim community, etc. The list could go on. They also experience racism, but each group experiences it differently.
Totally agree. And I had to ask that question because sometimes that question is put out of context, especially in the workplace when there's a comment made and say, oh, you hate me because I'm black, or you hate me because of I'm this. And so putting that into context to help people understand that it happens in different in different cultures as well, and we view it based on our experiences and based on how we were treated in stuff like that. And so knowing that is definitely important in everything, and it's very critical in this time. Yeah.
And I just wanted to, when I mentioned papal bulls, what I'm referencing is the doctrine of discovery. And I would highly encourage people to research the doctrine of discovery and what it is, and how it actually relates to land, and how it actually relates to Black people and the enslavement. Very, very deep and entrenched.
Yeah, very, very important. I think that brings well ways to stay educated. And I'm always educating myself too when calling it as it is, and acting on it. And just don't like you say, don't let someone slide when they're being racist. Call it out. But be respectful as well. But actually educate, because you don't want to be aggressive and then they're gonna think about your behavior versus thinking about the words that you're saying. How can you help people towards that? No, I'm educating people. Yes, there was an offense that was made to them, but how can they educate someone without like the shouting? Or or is shouting the only way to talk to people sometimes? For them to understand the way, us Black people, we just talk and we just call it out, and but how can we put that message in the tune in that way? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like I'll be honest. Sometimes the shouting like that might be warranted, depending on what has happened, what you've witnessed, or what the person is experiencing. But I think that there's palatable ways to get the message across to folks. And I go back to, if you're in a leadership role, and you don't always need to be, but I stay with that just because leadership roles can set the tone and tune for the organization. So I think that sometimes it needs to be done publicly, but not always. One-on-one conversations with folks who may have exhibited some type of racism or act of discrimination are important. And for the person receiving it, what you have to understand is that if myself as a Black man, African Nova Scotian man, is willing to take my time to come to you to express that you either said something that hurt me or my community, that means I actually care about you. And you shouldn't be defensive, because if I didn't care enough about the relationship, I would just let it go. And so the person coming to you actually cares about you enough to let you know that you've hurt someone or you've made a mistake. And knowing that as the person receiving the information, I think, is extremely important, because that can also set the tone. But if you're going to address racism, you've got to address it seriously. And so I think it's important to be stern. It's important to bring facts. It's important to bring any type of consequences or repercussions, and then any follow-up, because again, you're not going to change somebody's thoughts or ideology in a 10-minute conversation. So this has to be, this may need to be done over subsequent conversations with materials and with follow-up and with consequences. I'm all for consequences, and I'm all for being held accountable, myself included. And so in those type of situations, if you've done wrong, you may need to experience some type of consequences.
Totally agree. There is consequences to every action that's made, and it brings and you say accountability has a variety of ways of showing the cost and paying the price for that. And so, wow, this has been so good, DeRico. People in this world, sometimes they're hurtful. They say so much horrible they say so much hurtful things in society. But we need hope, and we need encouragement and engagement towards allowing people to stop that. And what would you say to the listening audience who's going to be listening to this podcast to engage them and encourage them in this work and in this area what will be a word of saying or motivation that will help guide us in this way? Yeah, yeah.
So I have two. So first one is that the tallest mountains have the best views, and that's literal and figurative as well. If you've ever hiked, if you ever climbed, it's tough when you're climbing the top of the mountain. Legs are burning. You need a drink of water, but when you get to the top, it's like, oh my God, this is beautiful. And for folks in the workplace, or really anywhere where they're experiencing some resistance, experiencing racism, and it feels never ending, that you're never going to be able to work through it. The tallest mountains have the best views. The toughest climbs have the best views. And so it will be undoubtedly a tough climb, a tough go. You'll feel like you're maybe failing at times. You'll feel like you're succeeding at times. But once you get to the top, and everyone is succeeding, and it's a much more equitable place, the view is going to be amazing. And the second one is that everyone has talent, but not everyone has the same opportunities. And I think that we need to be in the business of creating and sustaining opportunities for folks who may not have had. That could be in the workplace where that I'll use you as an example. That Templeton is really killing it in his role right now, and he may deserve to move up. Well, why not provide that opportunity? Or you may know that as a board member, you've sat on said board for 4 years, and there's a really awesome person from a racialized community who could also fill that space. Well, maybe you need to step aside and provide that opportunity. So everyone has talent, not everyone has the same opportunities. And just to sort of end that one off a little more is that think about all the folks who are living in poverty, living in difficult and challenging situations, who hadn't had the opportunity to be here, like just to showcase who they are as a person. There's people like you and I who are out there, but they just haven't been provided the opportunity. And throughout my career, I just had mentors, other Black men, Black folks, and especially Black women who have lifted me up, right or wrong, corrected me, and provided me with opportunity. So provide opportunity.
There you go, folks. Provide opportunity, give room for growth and for skill development, and see people from for their worth. I think that's really important. If they're worth it, then give them the opportunity to move forward, and don't limit their growth based on their color, their skin, based on their disability, based on their state of living. Don't base it on that. Base it on the capability of the individual and knowing their worth. That's so important. Thank you so much, DeRico, for that. At the Neighborhood Conversations, we try to bring inclusive conversations with inclusive people who bring a variety of knowledge. And DeRico Symonds, I would say that you brought this on the dot, man. Thank you so much for coming on, and we'll see you definitely at one of our next episodes. But for now, we'll see everyone later. Have a great day, and we'll see you at the next episode. This podcast is funded by the Government of Nova Scotia.